Bonjour à toutes et à tous, je m'appelle Giovanni et je suis chroniqueur pour Kairos. La chose semble devenir la norme. La semaine dernière, en Belgique, la censure a encore frappé. Nous avons rencontré Anastasia Trofimova, une réalisatrice russo-canadienne. Son film, qui montre la réalité de la guerre au travers des témoignages souvent tragiques des hommes qui la font du côté russe, suite à des menaces et des protestations de l'ambassade d'Ukraine, a été retiré sans préavis de la programmation du Festival de Louvain où il devait être projeté. Dans cette interview, nous abordons les pressions qu'elle a subies, la censure, mais aussi les réalités de la guerre, de ceux qui la font faire et de ceux et celles qui doivent la faire. Et surtout, la vérité et du chemin qui peut nous mener à la paix. Anastasia Trofimova, welcome to have accepted our invitations. So you're Russo-canadienne filmmaker. And so tell us what has brought you to Belgium, and maybe can you a bit explain what was the situation with your documentary and the film you were supposed to screen today, Saturday evening. So tell us about you and the situation.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I was supposed to screen the film Russians at War at the Dockville Film Festival. I'm just coming from The Hague, where we had 2 really nice screenings there. Unfortunately, when we were there, we found out from the media that our screenings were cancelled. So Dockville actually never reached out to us to let us know that this is going to be the case. And I still decided to come to Belgium because I have never been here myself, and it would be great to speak to people and see the town, see Leuven, where the film festival is taking place. And so here we are.
And you have been in Syria, in Iraq, Lebanon, Israel, Congo.
I've not been to Israel, no.
No, not Israel. So Palestine.
And I filmed in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon.
Okay.
Yeah, but Palestine.
And so you've been in Congo too, and now your last documentary takes place and kind of document the life of Russian soldiers on the front. And so you have experience, and have you ever seen something like this, like to forbid a screening of a movie?
No, I have never experienced this type of, I guess, censorship, you could call it, myself. And I must say that I think the situation for the documentary scene overall is becoming more and more sensitive, because I know that our film was not the only one cancelled at Dockville. It was actually there was also another film that was cancelled. I'm not sure what the reasons were there. And it's a pretty dangerous precedent you can have where an embassy of a foreign state would have the power to cancel a film that was chosen for its merits by a Belgian film festival. And that's quite alarming and quite unfortunate, of course, yeah.
Yeah, but I think, I don't know if you heard the term cancel culture. And it's something like in the Western media sphere, it has been pretty pregnant, lately in the last decade. And here I have the feeling that there is really an intensification of these type of measures that were absolutely absent. They didn't exist if we go back 20 years ago. And now it's like more and more reiterating. So, and this is actually insane. I've never heard that an embassy can put pressure without even passing through the legal system so it's even not forbidden. It's a decision of the festival. So what were the motivation invoked by the festival? Because you come from far away. And they just cancel it last minute. So how do you feel? And what were their excuse they used to say, well, we're going to cancel you tonight?
Well, I mean, I think that's a question that's best directed to them, because myself and my team, we would like to know how that decision was taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, no one from the festival reached out to us to explain how that happened. We found out from the official festival statement and from the media that picked it up. The only thing that I could say is what we saw in the official statement is that the festival decided to follow the request of the Ukrainian embassy and not to show this film.
Okay, so it was just between them and you. You just are there, left over,
Yeah.
with your
Seems
movie
like
to show to nobody. And so it's the first time it happens ever to you to have a screening cancelled for a political reason.
Well, with this film, it was quite a long journey. With none of my previous films has that happened. But with this film, we had a fantastic world premiere at Venice.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went on to TIFF. And
TIFF is the
Toronto International Film Festival.
Oh.
It's quite large also. It's very well known, very respected. Mm-hmm. And then we had, I think, about 10 to 15 festivals after that. And starting from TIFF, there was pressure applied to various film festivals by the Ukrainian political establishment and their advocates.
Mm-hmm.
So in TIFF, I think it was one of the worst instances where there were obviously, the ambassadors and the consuls of Ukraine in Canada who were demanding the cancellation of this film and the censorship of this film. Then some Ukrainian Canadian advocacy groups and Ukrainian Canadian politicians. TIFF stood by us.
I think Chrystia Freeland.
Freeland, yeah, the former it's great
Vice
that you
President
know,
of Canada.
Yeah, I didn't know that the news made it this far, but
no, but we know her pretty well.
Okay. Yeah, and then she spoke out against the film. She's Ukrainian from her grandfather's side and I think grandmother's side. And she spoke out against the film, from what we understand, without having seen it. And in a way, sort of, I guess, empowered the people who wanted to cancel it without seeing it also. Nevertheless, TIFF stood by us. We did have 2 fantastic screenings in Toronto. And the same pattern that we saw happen at TIFF, we saw happen with other festivals. Some festivals braved it out, and they were great. But for some, the threats that they've received, that they told us about, were so great that they decided to not to show it. And they were advised by their security advisors to not to show it. And I know that, for example, at Zurich, it was the first time in the history of the festival that they could not show a film for security reasons. In Athens, it was the first time in the history of the festival that they could not show the film for security reasons. And for TIFF and its 49-year history, it was the first time that a screening had to be paused and then moved to a different date because of security reasons. So in that sense, it is quite a dangerous precedent that is being set around the world. And I'm just worried that it won't be just our film, but pretty much any interests of any lobby group, of any state, of any corporation, they could be promoted in such a way to censor films that touch upon subjects that we should be speaking about. Because there are a lot of issues in the world right now that we need to discuss. And documentary, in a sense, is a window into worlds that many of us do not see.
We can say it too.
Yes. And if you're trying to censor documentary, if documentary does get censored, all we're left is with the voices of the bullies who are trying to censor it. And at the same time, I understand it is a sensitive topic. I fully empathize with the suffering of the Ukrainian people. I wish this war would have never happened. They do not deserve anything that is happening to them, 100%. But to use in a way their suffering, to politicize their suffering, to censor film is not the answer. And in a way, it's unfortunately, that's sort of what's been happening. A lot of the people who speak out against the film have not seen it. They see it as politically unacceptable because it humanizes a side that they do not want to see humanized. And that is a very dangerous precedent as well, because once we start going down the dehumanization road, where does it stop? In a way, I think this war that's happening is incredibly dangerous because from what I've been hearing in Europe, there's a lot of fear now about, there's a discussion about Russia attacking, about the war coming to Europe. And I personally do not believe so. I do not believe that this is a viable threat. To me, it feels like a lot of kind of scaring the population in order to sort of prepare them for war, which I wish would never happen in Russia or Ukraine, and I wish it would never extend anywhere.
But there are many things at stake, and just here there is obviously, and this is what we tweet weekly in Kairos, like the fear-mongering campaign. It's systematic, it's methodic, it uses the puppet threats of some mechanism to persuade us that Russia is a big danger. But here my question is, you mentioned the path to dehumanization, and you told me your documentary, like you have been exposed to also a methodic campaign of harassment and cancelling your documentary wherever it takes place for a screening. It has been pressure and threats in Zurich, Athens, now Leuven. What is your documentary talking about? Because also Russia doesn't speak even about your documentary, and it isn't screened in Russia. Even the producing team isn't a Russian team. It's a Canadian team. So French-Canadian team. So what is your documentary talking about that is so bad that it can be even shown?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's an international project, so it's a French-Canadian team that took it on, and a lot of people in my team, they have fantastic credentials. They're very well known in their industry. And I think it's great when we are able to have international productions that bring also the world together in a sense. We did face, attempts at censorship from some groups, but at the same time, I must say that has not been the entirety of our experience. Actually, a majority of our experience has been really positive. We have received a lot of complimentary feedback from people, from audiences, from the press, from film reviews, which often compare this film to All Quiet on the Western Front, or for me, it was, I think the best compliment was compared to Come and See, which was a Soviet classic about World War II. And to Robert Capa's works at some point. So we did receive a lot of positive feedback and a lot of support, which is important to say. It has not been just this relentless cancellation campaign, although that's part of the procedure. But what is the film about? The film shows a reality of the war from the Russian side of the war. It is not an analytical or political film that's going to talk about political personalities, about the causes of the war, about history, and what led to it. Because I think, for me, one of the main reasons I wanted to make a documentary, an observational documentary like this, aside from the fact that I like personally this kind of format the most, is because I felt that was missing in this war.
But you mostly also shoot the camera on your shoulder, like it's really first hand.
Yeah, I did the cinematography myself as well. I filmed and I directed this project pretty much alone because you could not have more than one person on the front. It was not really even officially sanctioned that I was going to be there. So the film shows the reality of Russian soldiers in this war. And this element, the human element from this war, has been missing from everything that I've seen here. So that's what I wanted to do. It is a bit, it was quite interesting for me to see that a lot of people who wanted to censor this film, like, for example, representatives of the Ukrainian embassy here, refuse to see this film, but also think it's inappropriate to see these kinds of stories. And you must ask yourself why. Because if we do not see each other as human beings, that will only lead to the spread of hatred and the continuation of this war, which will not benefit anyone, especially people in Ukraine and people in Russia. So I think it's important to see each other and to kind of build these bridges of understanding.
But here, actually, the question, it's kind of always, it's recurring. When it comes down to war, you have always the power structures that see war as a chessboard where you just move pieces. And actually also coming from the Ukrainian embassy or Chrystia Freeland, that we really appreciate, it's like the Stalinian sentence about, I don't know what book anymore, but when somebody asked about a book that Stalin had forbidden, Stalin answered, I haven't read it, but I disapprove it.
It wasn't Stalin.
No?
No, it wasn't Stalin. It was trials of... I'm going to make a mistake now. It was the trials of... Was it Pasternak?
It was Pasternak. That was the author of the book.
Of the trials. And it was actually not Stalin himself, but one of members of the literary community that spoke out against Pasternak in the trial period. And he basically said the phrase which many people actually remember when they're talking about
it's a famous historic quote.
Yeah.
But okay, even if it wasn't Stalin, it's like the spirit of that time. That was the Stalinian one, and where you have a censorship like on a baseless ground.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I disapprove of it, and that's pretty much has been the story with around this film in a way, because this film has received a lot of attention. There are a lot of people talking about it, but few have seen it still. And unfortunately, now fewer will see it. Unfortunately, we will not have a chance to present it at Dockville. But yeah, that is the paradox, I guess, around this. And I hope more and more people will get a chance to see it.
I haven't seen the documentary yet, but I have watched other pieces of your work. And this is what you do. Like, you give words to the humans that are in a war. They have their reason, they have their flaws, and the reason may be bad, may be good, whatever, but it's still human at play. And so you don't enter. And I think this is why documentary is so essential at the perception of the bloody business of war. Is because when you hear politicians, now it's Trump, then it's the EU Commission, then it's Vladimir Putin or Sergei Lavrov or Zelensky, whatever, it's all about this and that and territories, like abstract entities. And what you just try to document is that all of that is only possible because there is people fighting and killing each other. So it's hard to understand why this is bad and considered a matter to be censored and cancelled.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at which parties usually ask for this film to be censored, unfortunately, it's the position of the Ukrainian state. And we've been trying to figure out why are they so vehemently against this film. And from what we've been seeing, you know, because we also want to understand the criticism. Were we wrong in some way? Did we miss something? Did I miss something? Did my award-winning producers miss something? Did Venice miss something? Did TIFF miss something with this film? Because we're open to criticism. We're open to kind of rethinking about ourselves. But to say that certain people do not deserve a voice and certain people should not be humanized, that's very dangerous. Because there have been people in history that made lists of people who should and should not be humanized. And those were not humanity's proudest moments. It is very dangerous to, in a way, to fall into that trap without realizing that that's what you're doing, you see. But the interesting thing about human beings, and that's why I was always curious about conflict, because that's a place where the human condition is at its most raw.
Yeah, it's a life and death constant question.
People are the most honest in that sense. I was curious to see that because war, unfortunately, is part of the human condition. Paradoxes are part of the human condition. Believing something because emotionally you're attached to it is part of the human condition. And that's why documentary has to reflect that. Documentary cannot walk on a tightrope of what is permissible today, because that's when you have propaganda. Documentary has to always look outside the box of narratives that are being pushed by various sides politically and look at the ordinary person. For me, when we're talking about ever the big picture, for me the big picture is never the enemy du jour, who is fighting who today. For me, the big picture is always the ordinary man. And the ordinary man, in every single film that I've made so far, was always my main subject. And it was the same in this one. So I hope that we will still be able to organize the screening in Belgium, perhaps.
Hopefully one day.
And get more people to see it, and then we can have a discussion. That'd be great.
We can also do that online, actually. But it's also regarding, so there is two parts to my question, is regarding the dissemination process. It's actually, and coming back to also contextualizing the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Like, personally, I have never heard a dehumanization of the Ukrainian people by the Russian government. They still say Ukrainians are brothers, but they have been hijacked by Banderist group of people. And also I can remember these words of Poroshenko saying, the former Ukrainian president, calling the Russian-speaking people from East Ukraine, Donbass, like they are pigs and they deserve nothing. And these are their very words. Even on national television, you had Banderists calling for the death and the extermination, like calling obviously for ethnic cleansing and genocide in eastern Ukraine. So what I do see, it's it's a tragedy for both sides, but there is really, and it's death is death, like it's the ultimate equalizer, sort of. But then what makes people, one speech here you were saying about like the politics storyline, but there is always a story which is more or less true than the other. So if we have two sides, and so I'd like also to know a bit more about your perception of the reason of that conflict and what has bring it, and actually from somebody having a foot in both sides, so the Russian side and the NATO side, you have seen both sides of the story. And what's your, not opinion, like real judgment? What is the judgment you have about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have access to the NATO side to see what they're thinking and why they're acting the way they're acting. To be honest, before I went to Donbass myself, I didn't know that much about the conflict because at that point I was really focused on ISIS in Syria and Iraq. So at that point in 2014 and onwards, I was chasing ISIS in Iraq. So I missed a lot of the things that were happening in Donbass at this moment. In 2022, I started to, of course, follow much more what's happening over there. But it wasn't until I spoke to people from there that I started to be surprised about the preconceptions that I had myself before that. Because in a way, I've been reading various media about it, and there seem to be two very conflicting narratives about that. So there was a narrative that the people of Donbass were hijacked by the Russian authorities, and they were forced to fight against other fellow Ukrainians. And there was the other narrative that it was the Ukrainian authorities that began an anti-terror operation against the people in Donbass for their desire to secede from Ukraine in 2014. And at that point, to be honest, I did not have an opinion myself because I'm, in a way, having seen quite a number of conflicts, I'm very careful with forming an opinion until I go and I see and I speak. Now, I must say I did not have much of an access to the Ukrainian side of the situation. I mean, prior, I've spoken to a number of Ukrainians, and it seemed to be, from those that I've spoken with, it seemed to be not really an issue. It's kind of a non-issue. Something's happening over there in the east. We don't really know. We have our own lives. And that's it. But when I went to Donbass and spoke to people there, I was really, really surprised by how much hatred there is towards the government in Kiev for the way they handled 2014. And a lot of people, like even the person that brought me into this war, who is Ukrainian from Donbass, he lost his house in 2014 due to the Ukrainian bombardment. He lost his house, which he built himself, and he lost his business. He was making these metal structures, fences, and things like that. And he was actually pretty well off. He had his own personal driver. He had a beautiful wife, 2 kids, and had a fantastic life. Now, after the bombing by the Ukrainian Air Force of Donetsk, where he was living, he had to take his family out to Russia and sort of start his life over. And he's almost 50. And, it's like you're homeless. And that's part of the reason why he joined the Russian army, to support his family. That's a story. That's one story. I'm sure at the same time you could find stories of Ukrainians who will completely disagree with Ilya and his perception of what happened. But it was interesting to me that those two sides, the Donbass versus the anti-Donbass, let's say, side, that this was an actual division. And until I went there, I actually had no idea how deep and how sort of tragic it is. Because I could tell you that even Ilya's own family, well, his wife's family, his wife is also from Donetsk, and she has 2 sisters. One sister lives in Odessa. They speak, but not about politics. Another sister lives in Western Ukraine, and they don't speak at all. Because the sister in Western Ukraine considers her to be a separatist terrorist. And Ilya's wife, obviously, returns the favor with the same attitude that, to her sister. And their father, the father of these 3 sisters, at some point lived around Donetsk, in a city not far from Donetsk, which was for a while controlled by the Ukrainian army. And he was saying, living in a basement of one of the buildings there under control of the Ukrainian army, that he was waiting for his son-in-law to come and liberate him with the Russian army. Now, the man is Ukrainian. He's been living there since, the Soviet Union. And listening to these stories, I realized that before going there, I did not understand the size of the tragedy and the size of the division inside Ukraine.
There was obviously a civil war going on since 2014. I don't know if you've heard by any chance about, she's a French documentary filmmaker also called Anne-Laure Bonnel. No. Well, the case is pretty similar, but she had to face death threats because she did 2 documentaries on Donbass. And actually, her trajectory is pretty interesting because she also went to document the High Karabakh conflict in Armenia and Azerbaijan, and she also went to Syria, Lebanon. So, and you have not only common point regarding your job, not only regarding the fact that you are the very few woman war filmmaker and documentary filmmaker, but also you have faces like censorship and threats. And from what I've seen from Donbass and the origin of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, and why it's not about taking side or picking who's good or who's wrong. It's about looking for truth. This is why we try to do here the best we can. And from what I know from history and also from the mediatic treatment of that conflict, it's like prior 2022, like even when it started in 2014, you have titles in the New York Times or in the Guardian that it's a staged revolution. Maidan was supported by CIA and MI5, by the British Secret Services. America is trying to use Ukraine as a proxy, and so on. And then all these also studies and investigation on the corruption of the Ukrainian power, the oligarchs, and so on. And then even when Zelensky came out as the president in 2019, the way he was involved into the Pandora Papers, he has money offshores, and so on. And so even in 2021, Zelensky was considered as a corrupted elected president that even didn't hold the promise on which one he was elected. And this is documented fact by mainstream medias in the West. It's not Russian propaganda. But in 2022, when the conflict started, everything completely shifted. Like it's 180% narrative shift. Like now Zelensky is a war hero. It's for its population. It's a shame what the Russians are doing. We even compared like Putin to Hitler. And when you check the facts, so maybe it's, the focal is a bit, the Russian makes real problem a little bit bigger for their propaganda. Like there is banderism, but how much and how big? There is corruption, but how much and how big? So maybe it's a question of proportion, but the facts are there. You had documented like banderism movement with Pravdi Sector, Centaurus, Azov.
I have never documented them.
And
because I've never encountered them.
I mean, not you, but it was documented previously of 2022 by Western media like Vice, BBC, The Guardian. They were all talking about it. So it exists, and the issue was there. And it's like in 2022, oh no, that doesn't exist, and everything started in 2022. So are you aware of these also like historic roots of the conflicts?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I understand what you're talking about, and and that sort of coverage, it sort of helps the fog of war, right? But for myself, I was always interested in the regular people. Yes, politicians, they play all kinds of dirty games, and narratives are written and rewritten, and history, in a way, is also written and rewritten. It was interesting for me to see how Zelensky is now rewriting the Soviet past, which is quite surprising because I've actually followed him since I was a teenager. Like I was watching his show. I always thought he was great and really funny, and he was always making fun of politicians in a very sharp way. But in a way, I wonder if some of those things that he said before could be applied to himself now. At the same time,
he knows the tricks.
At the same time, I think it's very important to be gentle with people who are in war, because in a way, there are these, let's say, roughly speaking, two sides in Donbass and outside of Donbass. And each of them believes they have the truth, right? Because in a way, I think they view it through a different prism. They can view certain facts through a different prism. The bombing of Donetsk is a tragedy for people of Donbass, but it's a counter-terror operation for people who are watching outside and they don't know much about what's happening. And the reason being is because it's a threat from Russia, and Russia is controlling. And all these narratives that are, again, starting to play and start to be disseminated by, the powers that be. For me, I'm always interested in the ordinary person and how in this kind of war of narratives, in this firestorm of bullets, each with its own narrative, how does that ordinary person deal with that? And how does he still remain human? Right? So I think the one thing that has been a mistake is that for people starting from 2014 not to be able to understand each other and to find common ground, because it has been so heated. And it's completely understandable because lives are lost, because people really, really do suffer. But again, I never really cared too much about big politicians, the people who are in geopolitics. I'm not a fan of most of them, I could say, because I understand that big politics has to be, in a way, dirty, in the sense that to be a big politician, you have to be able to sacrifice thousands of lives for whatever goal you deem to be great. I am not a kind of person who would be able to do that. And that's why I'm always focused on the ordinary man, not the big celebrity politicians and, whatever they're trying to achieve. And there have been enough analysts, I think, in this war that talk about, the reasons why certain politicians do what they do and the repercussions that they have. But I'm more interested always in the ordinary man. To me, he is the big picture.
But so the ordinary man is at the center of your work. You want to, as you said, war is part of the human nature. If it's a part of it, there is some sort of inevitable character to, and for good or bad reason, but expression of that violence, right? And ultimately, the reasons, they can be for religious reason, they can be for even affective reason, but when it comes down to war, it's mostly for resources, territories. But not only. Like, for example, and if war is inevitable, and there are, and as we said, always two narratives, like of the big politicians. But in what extent, in general, not here regarding the Ukrainian and Russian conflict, there is also legitimacy to war. Like in the Palestinian conflict, has the Palestinian the right to defend? In the Syrian conflict, has Bashar the right to defend against ISIS? Has the Kurdistan the right to defend against ISIS and Bashar, but also some Turkish troops? So, and then also, what Donbass, who has started? Like, the one say it's you, the other say it's you, but if it's part of human nature, if it's inevitable, and if there are two sides, how legitimate is one side to fight the other?
No. I think with this war, I came to a realization about wars in general, that most people who are involved in war, and I'm talking again about the ordinary man, usually fights for defense.
Mm-hmm.
People fight for defense of something they love, whether it's their country, it's their home, it's their family. You ask on both sides of the Russo-Ukrainian front, what are you fighting for? And both sides will say, we're defending our home,
Mm-hmm.
our way of life. For the Russian side, it might be a paradox to some people, but for the Russian side, there is kind of an attitude that Russia was going to be attacked by NATO through using Ukraine's hands. So there is a belief like that, and it's very important to understand,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to understand the war,
Mm-hmm.
what the side believes in. If you talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, paradoxically, both sides will also say that they are defending
Mm-hmm.
their way of life, their family, and their country. If you look at the Kurdish, Syrian, Assad, Free Syrian Army, all these sides, all of them will say that we are defending something. So the way war is always usually sold,
Mm-hmm.
it's playing on the feelings of allegiance and feelings of love. It's not usually to go and to, kind of acquire new lands and that sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go acquire new resources. Let's go acquire some oil fields. Usually, you cannot sell a war with those kind of dry calls. So that's part of the paradox of the human nature.
Mm-hmm.
We keep having wars, but let's look actually at the mechanism in which they are usually sold to the ordinary man. And usually it's out of love. And that's the paradox.
But there is a French author, I think it's Anatole France, that said, and this is how works propaganda. It gives you emotional reasons to do the war and to feel entitled and legitimate in your action. But he says, like, we believe we do war for our motherland, when indeed we do it for the industrials. And and going back actually to that sentence, it's also what I recognize from the Western part, so the NATO side. It's and you have been in all these like conflict and war zones in Syria, in Lebanon, at the border almost of the Palestinian border, in Ukraine. And what I see, it's a form, and this is what we document in this media. It's in every side, there is a dehumanization process. Like, if you look at the Zionist narrative, they are calling also the Palestinian, like, they are bugs and dogs. If you look at the ISIS narrative, they are kufir, like infidels, and decapitation is a pretty common thing practiced by them. And you can hear the same thing from Ukraine on the ethnic Russian living in the Donbass. And from what I know from history, and it's really, really, really concerning. It's my impression is that, and there is even Hannah Arendt that said in the 50s that Germany has lost the war, but not the Nazis. And it feels like there is a very steady thing going on now, like almost a revelation, because we have received Al-Jolani, like the founder of the front, the Al-Nusra Front, last week on a Monday at the EU Commission, and we're gonna send $5 billion to that person, which is a decapitator person, for a peaceful and inclusive transition in Syria. And to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I really think that Zionism is the Jewish form of fascism, that ISIS and Al-Nusra is the Muslim form of fascism, and that Banderism is the Ukro-national form of fascism. And we, the European, we are, I think, the liberal form of fascism. Like, it's all a disguise, but when you see the actions, when you follow the money, which is what you are supposed to do as a reporting journalist, follow the money, find the connections, and see where the dots are placed. It's, to my impression, you have these people with the money, and they are playing with human lives and using them to serve their interests. So this is where I do believe that the war manifests itself. It's almost staged and prepared. So from your knowledge, how do you think that war are created to happen?
Well, it's a big question. And I mean, I think I can, as a filmmaker, I can try to answer it. I mean, I can answer more about the film and things that I've seen while making the film. But war, in a way, there's nothing new about this war that hasn't happened in previous wars. You mentioned dehumanization.
Mm-hmm.
No war in the history of mankind was ever possible without dehumanization. Whichever names any side chooses to call their enemy, that's up to their creativity. But usually it has something to do in the realm that they are subhuman, they are attacking our way of life, and they are the reason why we cannot live well. Something in this realm. And in a way, what's happened with this film is there is sort of a push for dehumanization of the Russian side in order for this war to continue, because you cannot have the meat grinder of the war turning without hatred and without this fog of war, which is going to obscure any human features of the other side. And I think that's sort of the reason why there was such an attack on this film from the warring nation, from Ukraine, in order not to show the enemy as a human being.
But also it was accepted by the countries where it was censored. You didn't get protection from a Ministry of Culture that says, oh, Ukraine, you can't censor in our country. It's not like you had an official statement.
Yeah, I mean, we basically had support from cultural institutions. Ministries, no, you're right, in that sense. We had support from cultural institutions, from individuals. But I think, in a way, there is this climate of fear where it's almost, and that's the fascinating thing, which I would never think when I went to the front to make this film. I never thought that we would come across something like that. There is a climate of fear, of not, of criticizing something that, let's say, the Ukrainian state would do. because Ukraine has suffered a lot, and you do empathize with them. I empathize with them. But at the same time, it was almost kind of used in a way to push for things that in any other situations would not be allowed. But that's sort of the case. That's where we are now, yeah.
And my last question is a bit like more philosophical. So you have a lot of first-hand experience. You have lived with people fighting wars, basically. And so with your knowledge and understanding as history witness, how does the word of Julian Assange resonates with you when he say that for the merchant of death, the weapon seller, a successful war isn't with a military success on the battlefield, but an unsuccessful one that never ends on the battlefield. And if this is right now the reality, like this happen, wars happen, tragedies happen, what would it take to go towards peace, where finally humans can be humans?
That's a fantastic question. We, as a humanity, have to find ways to make wars not profitable, to make peace more profitable than war. But so far, wars are profitable, and that's why we'll continue having them until we figure out a way how to make it more profitable to work together, to build together. In every society, you see, there's always a balance between different industries. There is the weapons industry, there are other industries. They do not always have the same goals. But it would be difficult to deny that the weapons industry has won a lot in this war. If you look at the stock of Rheinmetall in Germany, if you look at, I forget what the name is, of the weapons manufacturer in France, of Lockheed Martin, of other companies, they have made a terrible amount of money on this war.
And this was just the beginning, because I don't know if you're aware, but Ursula von der Leyen, on one hand, has announced 800 billion budget for European rearmament, and the new First Minister, former BlackRock director of the German branch of BlackRock, so Friedrich Merz, has announced 1 week after he was elected 1 trillion, so $1,000 billion on a 10-year plan to rearm Germany. So
I mean, it's crazy amount of money when you think about it, and all the places where it could have gone instead.
With that money, we can redesign education system, farming system.
Absolutely, yeah.
Almost everything.
And focus on other issues that are at hand. It is sad to see that so far as humanity, we have not found a way to make wars not profitable.
But don't you think that you're filming the normal man, the ordinary man, you call him? Don't you think it's up to him? Because it's in the nature of the big politicians to create the war. And it's my position that it's going to be about us to say, stop, no more.
It is the idealistic dream to have people organize and to say that. Unfortunately, in the span of human history, it has not been possible so far. It is always going to be a constant battle to design a new system where wars are not profitable. And I think, yes, that's something that definitely people should try to focus on. Absolutely.
Anastasia, so thank you very much for having come on the show today. And we hope we can organize a screening soon for the piece.
Thank you very much.